Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. Those of you who've already shown up, I want to give you a grand welcome. I was talking to Sven earlier, and I said that I told him that I'm really interested in this because prior to getting involved in Azure, I was a Windows Server MVP, and spent a lot of time, working in this Windows Server world. And the two worlds are coming together. So why don't we get started? I just have a little pitch to go through for you. Okay. Oops. Hang on. I have to share. Hang on, let me do this. Get started here. Okay. Okay. Having a bit of a problem getting my system started. Okay. Stop sharing. Okay. Okay, can you folks see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Let me get started, okay? Okay, well, I want to welcome you all to this month's meeting of the Nashville Microsoft Azure User Group. This is a slide about our mission. We're all about everything related to Azure, all aspects of it, providing a forum for often discussion and informal networking among the membership. It's unfortunate that we can't meet in person, although we may eventually go back to meeting in person. But again, we all like to think that we're relevant to all people at all levels that are interested in Azure, both CIOs, CTOs, architects, developers, and so forth. So this is a little bit about our history. We were founded back in 2013 with 4 members, and currently we have over 2,700 members. And so we're growing and getting larger and larger. But we could always use more members, so tell your friends and coworkers about us, okay? Big news, it's not so big. It's been that way for a couple of months now. The group is going global. In fact, it is a global group. Many of our members are from outside of the Nashville area. So they can't attend a physical meeting, so it's good that we have a virtual meeting for them to attend. But spread the word, can always use more members. We have a job board, okay? If you're looking for a job or hiring for a job, this group discussion forum has been turned into a job board. So post a short message in the Azure Group discussion forum with your contact information. Say whether you're looking for a job or hiring for a job. And again, we're not trying to replace, Indeed or Dice or any of those systems. We're more for the local people and what if they want a job or they're looking for someone. Okay. We're currently meeting online all the time, and that is our URL. It's nashazure.com. We're definitely interested in supporting you. And if you have a particular topic that you'd like to have us covered, let us know, okay? So let us know what future meeting topic you're interested in. And also, if there's a topic that we aren't covering or that you'd like us to cover, let us do that as well. And if you'd like to present to the group and you've got a topic that you can share with us, we're going to be doing more and more of that in the future. And we'll cover that when we get to it. This is the board of directors. I'm the founder and president. By day, I'm an Azure Solutions architect. Roger Dahlman is the co-founder and vice president. He's up there at Deloitte as an enterprise architect here in Nashville. Tim Warner, whom I'm sure a lot of you know, is another vice president, and he is a Pluralsight course and book author. techtrainer.tim is TechTrainer. Looks like oh no, I did have the period. Okay, TechTrainer.tim is the location of his website, and of course Jack Hagler has been our refreshment sponsor from the beginning, and he's still that. So he's in Vaco. He's a a director of recruiting at VACO. We have two major sponsors. By the way, we are looking for more sponsors, but right now we have two major sponsors, Microsoft, who pays for our meeting dues, and VACO, who pays for our Zoom subscription. So we're really lucky in that sense. I can remember paying for a website like this out of my own pocket back when I lived in Connecticut and worked for Microsoft in New York. So there are sponsorship opportunities. If you'd like to have 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to promote your company, product, or service, we're up for that, okay? Sponsorship, we're always up for sponsorship of things like raffle prizes, gift certificates, products, and things we can give away to our membership. And of course, if your company's interested in co-sponsoring a future meeting, let us know. Contact Roger Dahlman, who's our sponsorship chairman, and we'll hook you up. This is our YouTube channel. As you can see, it's pretty full. So that's we have a lot of material out there now. Tonight's meeting is on Azure Arc, and Azure Arc is a very interesting subject to me because before getting involved in Azure, some 14, 15 years ago, I was a Windows Server MVP, specializing in Windows Server. So again, I'll let Sven tell you all the information about that subject. Then I won't read his bio, but he can tell you a little bit about his background. So Sven, I'm going to turn control over to you. Okay, so I want to turn control over to you. Let me just get control here. Okay. Participants. Okay. See if it works to make you co-host, okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, looks like I am.
Okay, great.
Looking good.
Okay,
All right.
I don't see your screen.
Yeah, we're gonna share that.
Oh, let me stop sharing. Okay, good.
I've got it. Yeah.
I forgot to stop.
Good to go.
Ooh,
Okay.
that's good.
So I'm gonna see. Bill, if you see notification there for an invitation to use Poly as an app. Since we talked about some audience interaction, this is Zoom asking you to use Poly. Do you see any notification or something? If not, it's okay. I was just trying to see if we could get some polls going.
I didn't see it, but
okay, it's all right. We won't worry about it. We'll try it for next time.
Okay,
that's okay. All right. So let's see. Am I sharing my screen? Oh no, I thought I was, but
okay.
Okay, for some reason that stopped. Okay, there we go. You should be seeing my screen, right? Is that right? No?
Yes, yes.
Oh, you do see it. Okay, yeah. All right, very good. So, hi everybody. Good evening. Oh, I see what's happening. It's the wrong screen. That's why it doesn't look like it's sharing for me. Let's see what's going on here.
What's the matter?
So that's kind of weird. I'm selecting the right.
I'm gonna make you host. How's that?
No, it'll be okay. It's just for some. Oh, maybe. Sorry. Do you see my slides? Is a question.
Yes, I do see your slides.
Okay. Sorry. It's just the Zoom. the control toolbar for the screen sharing on Zoom showed up. I'm on the wrong screen, so that's why I'm sharing the wrong screen. But okay, we're sharing the right screen. Very good. Okay. So let's start this over again. Right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session about Azure Arc, an introduction to hybrid cloud. I appreciate all of you coming here on a Wednesday afternoon. If you're in the Nashville area, the weather's pretty beautiful today. So I know you're taking time away from maybe some outdoor activities with the family to come learn something. And I certainly appreciate that. It's my pleasure to be here and to talk to you about this evening. My full-time job is at Microsoft, and I'm a principal cloud solution architect for our US education customers at Microsoft. So that means that I work with K-12 school systems, universities, academic medical centers, and libraries and museums as well. Of course, I don't do that all by myself. I'm part of a large team of cloud solution architects for our US education customers, and a much larger team, of course, of other people who are supporting our customers. But in this role, I spend my time helping our customers to design solutions. My specific area is Azure infrastructure and application innovation. So I spend a lot of time with things like virtual machines and networking and Azure SQL and API management and key vaults and tons of other things, including policy and governance and so on. And you may have seen, for example, one of my presentations I did earlier for this group about Azure policy. Now, in any case, that is my current role and my full-time job. I will say that I'm not here sponsored by Microsoft or anything like that. Any opinion that I express is wholly mine and does not necessarily reflect that of Microsoft or my colleagues. Well, let's delve straight in with kind of building an understanding as to what Azure Arc really is. And at a very high level, this slide does a really good job summarizing all of that. The key is in that second box from the top where it says single control plane with Azure Arc. What that means is that we can take, of course, our Azure resources, but also non-Azure resources, such as, for example, virtual machines or Kubernetes clusters that you're running on premises or that you might be running in other clouds, and bring them into the Azure control plane, right? And manage them from there so that you have one view of your entire IT estate. When we look at this diagram a little bit more in detail, you look at the next few boxes and you see that there's an arrow going up from infrastructure and there's an arrow coming down from Azure to services. Well, that is indicative of the fact that there are, as it were, two sides or two faces to Azure Arc. The one that we're going to focus on today is the one on the left, which is the infrastructure side of Azure Arc, which enables you to connect on-premises infrastructure, again, Kubernetes or virtual machines, entire VMware, vSphere, vCenters, okay, and bring them into that control plane with Azure Arc, manage them from within the Azure control plane. On the right-hand side is the whole other side of Azure Arc. And again, we're not going to focus on that today, but it's nevertheless a very interesting topic because that side of Arc allows you to take the services, the platform services that are available on Azure, or at least some of them, they're not all there yet at least, but take these platform services such as managed database services, managed instance, app service, function apps, logic apps, and run those platform services in your own environment, right? So if you wanted to create a function app, but for some reason, whether it be compliance or latency or something, the function app's place to run or to execute code is not in Azure, but it should be on premises, then you can do that using Azure Arc. And that service, that function app service, is going to run in your environment as a container. All right, again, we're not going to focus on that right-hand side of Azure Arc. For this presentation, we're going to focus on the left-hand side. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about what it means then to bring your infrastructure in the control plane of Azure Arc. What does that allow us to do? Well, here is an overview slide that lists several Azure services, including, for example, Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Sentinel, Azure Update Manager. So those are the services in Azure that you might be using already to manage your Azure virtual machines, your Azure infrastructure. So we can then use those same services to manage our on-premises VMs or VMware, or VMs in other clouds. So what can we manage? well, we can manage Windows Server, we can manage SQL servers, we can manage Azure Stack HCI, we can manage VMware, we can manage resources in the AWS cloud, we can manage it in Oracle Cloud, we can manage it in GCP, we can manage Azure IoT devices, we can manage Kubernetes clusters. On the non-Windows operating systems, we can manage a variety of Linux distributions, including SUSE and Red Hat. Others too, by the way. There's many more that aren't listed here. So that's essentially the entire scope of what, for many customers, right, consists or of what their environment consists of for many customers. Right. The reality for many customers is that they are in a hybrid situation, that they are running a lot of services on premises still, but that they're also running services in Azure. And this whole idea is that we're going to unify how those environments are managed. All right, so let's talk a little bit more specific yet again, and we're going to look at what some of these capabilities are. So we can reach Windows and Linux operating systems. So Windows Server virtual machines, Linux Ubuntu virtual machines that you're running. On premises or in other clouds, they could be virtual machines. On premises, you can also onboard bare metal operating systems. They don't have to be virtual machines, right? It could be bare metal. And the idea is that what you get just out of the box is even just getting a searchable inventory of every operating system that you have in your environment, right? The ones in Azure, the ones in the other clouds, the ones on premises. The next thing that we can do is use Azure Arc to configure those virtual machines or that bare metal using virtual machine extensions. Now, if you're using Azure virtual machines, you might already be familiar with what an extension is. An extension essentially provides additional knowledge about the operating system and configuration compatibilities or capabilities, excuse me, for the Azure VM agent to the operating system. Okay, a common extension that you might be using for your virtual machines might be a security extension for Defender for Cloud or an extension for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Well, those extensions that have been designed to work for Azure virtual machines are the exact same extensions that you can deploy on your Azure Arc VMs. Okay. Now, there are probably some extensions that don't really play a role in your on-premises virtual machines, and those wouldn't be available. But the extensions that I just mentioned, like the security extension for Defender for Cloud or the extension for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, those are applicable to your on-premises virtual machines or your on-premises operating systems as well. Now, by using extensions, what is it extending, right? In Azure, the extensions extend the capabilities of the virtual machine agent that's running on your VMs. Well, on premises, the extensions extend the capabilities of what we refer to as the connected machine agent, or CMA, connected machine agent. And you'll probably hear me refer to it today as the Arc agent as well. It's a little bit easier to say Arc agent than connected machine agent. So sometimes I'm a little bit lazy and I take the easy way out. But those two things refer to the same agent. All right, and I'm going to show you how all this gets done, right? I don't want you to think that this is going to be PowerPoint presentation all the day long. We're going to delve into demos and bring this to life as well. I just want to make sure we set the baseline here and cover some of these foundational or fundamental understandings that you would need. Now, we can configure virtual machines or operating systems on premises using Azure Arc. We can also apply governance concepts, such as, for example, using Azure built-in policies to audit the state or the compliance requirements of those virtual machines. So common compliance requirement that I deal with my customers is HIPAA and HITRUST. And that's, of course, for medical data. So there are Azure policies that will help you audit the configuration of the operating system for compliance with how you could or to say with settings and how you can comply with HIPAA. And so you can apply those same policies then on your on-premises virtual machines and take full advantage of the Defender for Cloud regulatory compliance experience to get a whole full-scale overview of anything on your network that would happen to manage or touch medical data. And we also want to talk about security, of course. So those Azure built-in policies that I've mentioned before are actually closely related also to the server security baselines that you can apply. In addition to that, we want to make sure that the users who have access to those Arc-enabled servers are authorized to have access to that. So the capabilities of Azure role-based access control also play a role here. In addition to that, and this is also very interesting and perhaps relevant mostly to application developers, or at least at first glance, it might be mostly relevant to application developers. Once we have a virtual machine, an operating system connected to Azure Arc, that operating system can get an Entra ID managed identity just like an Azure VM can. What is the benefit of that? Well, for example, if this machine that you've onboarded to Azure Arc is a web server, it may need to use a TLS certificate, right, to serve up HTTPS or to establish HTTPS connections. Well, where does that certificate get stored? We want to make sure that certificate is securely stored. We also want to make sure that when the certificate needs to be renewed, that we don't forget to renew a server. So in Azure, a great service for that is to use Azure Key Vault. Now, with an Azure virtual machine, we have the ability to connect the machine using its managed identity to the Key Vault so it can retrieve certificates that are stored in Key Vault for use in its web server. Okay. Well, we can do the same thing with an Azure Arc-enabled machine. Once that Azure Arc-enabled machine is onboarded, we can give it a managed identity, or actually it already has a managed identity just by the virtue of onboarding it. And we can then allow that managed identity to access a Key Vault just like we would with an Azure virtual machine. We can then use the same Key Vault extension to pull a certificate or multiple certificates from a Key Vault and install them on that host so that it can be used by, for example, Internet Information Services to serve up a TLS website. So those capabilities, there's some more that I could talk about, especially in the context of SQL Server. I actually do have a slide on this of all the things that we can do to specifically manage SQL servers that are running on premises. During the demos, if you're interested in that, message me in the chat and let me know, and I will pull up some demos specifically for SQL Server. Okay, but I'm not going to go through this slide. I want to keep going and actually talk about one of the primary ways in which I have recently helped customers get things done using Azure Arc. So I suspect many of you know that Windows Server 2012, SQL Server 2012 recently came end of life, right, after 10 years of total support. And the reality is that many users, many customers are still using Windows Server 2012 or 2012 R2 or using SQL Server 2012 because for some reason they have not been able to upgrade. Now, for those users, Microsoft offers extended security updates or ESUs. Now, those are things that are paid, right? It's not a free offering, but you can get 1 or 3 years of extended security updates to extend your runway a little bit to move off those now legacy and retired operating systems and database management systems. Now, before ESUs were enabled or could be enabled by Azure Arc, ESUs were something that you obtained through volume licensing. And you would reach out to your Microsoft reseller or to your account executive. You would tell them how many cores, excuse me, or how many licenses, whatever it was back in the day, that you needed to acquire for extended security updates. You would enter into that volume licensing agreement or extend your volume licensing agreement. And again, there would be a 1 year or a 3 year term that you would essentially pay for upfront. It didn't really matter if maybe your plan was to completely move off these legacy operating systems in 6 months or in 18 months. The term of that contract was was fixed pretty much in advance. Well, after the 1 year, you could extend for another year technically, but those are some of the nuances that don't really matter for the point I'm trying to make. Point I'm trying to make is you had to, in advance, pre-purchase as many licenses or cores for extended security updates that you needed. Now, with Azure Arc, this has transitioned to being a monthly billing that you can enroll, opt into, at the start of the end of life of these operating systems and database management systems. And whenever you're ready to retire those operating systems, you can just stop paying for them, right? So you're not engaging into a volume licensing transaction with a 1 or 3 year term. You're doing this on a month-to-month basis. So that can certainly save money in that sense. In addition to that, using Azure Arc to inventory your estate, you can make sure that you've identified all of the systems that have operating systems or database management systems on them that are end of life, right? So that you don't forget to enable ESUs on one of them. And so it's now entirely self-service. You don't have to reach out to your reseller. You don't have to reach out to your account team because volume licensing is no longer necessary. Now, just for clarity, I do want to mention that if you prefer to go the volume licensing route for extended security updates, that route is still available. You can still do that if you want to, right? But I think most of our customers, at least the ones that I've worked with, have opted to forego that volume licensing approach and simply use the Azure Arc method to get that flexibility. Now you see a little screenshot there of the Azure Arc user interface in the portal. That screenshot's already a bit outdated because we've reorganized some of the Azure Arc menu items. So I'm going to show you that live as well in just a few minutes. All right, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I don't see any questions or comments coming up yet, but again, don't hold back, please. I love audience interaction. I love your questions and your feedback. Right. So again, that's one of the newest things that Azure Arc can enable that I definitely want to highlight, especially because we're coming up on the retirement date of yet another, I guess we can call it legacy database management system now, SQL Server 2014. Will I think actually the end of support is in June of 2024. So, July of 2024 is when extended security updates would kick in if you are planning to retain SQL Server 2014 instances for, past July 2024. Okay. So, like I said, we'll take a look at that during the demo. But the first thing we have to do before we can manage any on-premises environment with Azure Arc is we have to do the onboarding. And what that means, I've already kind of lifted the curtain on that before, is we have to install an agent, the connected machine agent, or the Arc agent, if I don't feel like saying that long word. Now, that agent must communicate with Azure, unsurprisingly, to send data, right, exchange information, and receive directives, right, receive instructions on what needs to be configured. Now, there are, generally speaking, 3 options that are available to you. Probably the most common option that I've seen customers use is a direct connection via, from the Arc-enabled server, right? Let's say a Linux Ubuntu VM that you have on premises over the internet to the Azure Arc public endpoint. Now, if for some reason in your environment, your virtual machines, it could be like a domain controller even, right, doesn't have direct access to the internet, you can also configure a proxy server connection. Again, this is probably also the second most common method that I see customers use. Servers that do not have internet connectivity, but can get to the internet, can get to the public endpoint of Azure Arc using a proxy server. So that's option number 2. And again, purely coincidentally, I'm sure in my experience, the second most common option. Then finally, if none of those 2 options are available to you, you can also choose to use the private link service and a private endpoint for Azure Arc, which will enable you to connect those Azure Arc-enabled servers, not crossing the public internet at all, but instead using your express route and or site-to-site VPN connection. And I'm going to see if I can make a quick edit on the fly to the slide here, because ExpressRoutes not space in it. So, I don't like typos on slides. So ExpressRoutes not supposed to have a space. So I just fixed that on the slide here. So that is your third option. This requires quite a bit of additional configuration, at least initially, right? Before you can configure your first server. After you have that completed, of course, onboarding an extra server isn't any additional work, but some of the work that you have to consider is, for example, DNS configuration and so on.
Hey, Sven? Sven?
Yeah, I saw a question in the chat, and the question's gone now.
Question, do you folks see the chat too, as well as the participants list? There were a bunch of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I see one from Mamo. What does Azure Arc infrastructure look like? I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but maybe once we go into the Azure portal, it'll get clarified.
Okay.
VM appliance, etc. Okay, I think I see what you're understanding. So I think maybe what I understand what you're saying. I think maybe you're asking about what you need to deploy on premises to enable the use of Azure Arc. Well, I'm actually going to show that, right? But it's just the agent that you're going to be deploying. Okay. Well, in most cases, there is, if you want to manage the whole vSphere environment, then you're going to have a virtual appliance. But in most cases, all you need is to deploy an agent on each of your operating systems that you want to onboard to Azure. That's all that's needed. So this Azure Arc-enabled server that's on the picture here on the left-hand side, that would be one of many, right? If you had 100 virtual machines that you wanted to manage with Azure Arc, you would have 100 of these Azure Arc-enabled servers that all would, connect via Azure Arc, either over the internet to the public endpoint, or via the proxy server, or via the private endpoint. Okay, that would be the way it works. So that answers your question, Mamo. Now let's see what's next here on the diagram. Yeah, so this is a more intricate picture of what the connected machine agent does, right? How it connects, and the different endpoints that it's going to access. So, for example, not just any system is going to be allowed to connect to your environment, of course. So there's some authentication authorization required, and that's going to go via Entra ID. Then, in order to get some or send some metadata, right, and to get guest configuration details, etc., there are different endpoints that are operated in Azure. You don't have to worry about those, right? We run them for you. And you can see all of those connections are established via HTTPS over port 443. Okay, so even the extensions that might be there, like, for example, the AMA or the Azure Monitor Agent, which is what you might be using to collect logs from those servers that you want to store in the log analytics workspace. Again, all of that connects via HTTPS port 443. But just understand that there are multiple endpoints involved. The more of the Azure Arc capabilities that you're going to be using, the more of these endpoints that you're going to need. All right. So let's walk through onboarding virtual machines. So I'm going to switch over to the Azure portal and to my demo environment. So here we are. This is my Azure portal, and I'm going to navigate to the Azure Arc interface. So there's a couple of ways, of course, to do that. I'm just going to type it in because that'll work for everybody. Type in Azure Arc and click on the Azure Arc link that appears. Now, what we're seeing here is the homepage of Azure Arc. This has changed a little bit. If you haven't looked at it in a couple of weeks, this might look new to you, and it is in fact new. But there's some handy links that are out here. And these first two buttons, add resources and then deploy services, those actually reflect the two sides of Azure Arc that I mentioned earlier. So adding resources to Azure Arc means that we're going to be onboarding on-premises infrastructure, or again, infrastructure running in another cloud, perhaps, and manage them with Azure. Then the other side is deploying services. So that would essentially be where you might have a Kubernetes cluster that you're managing with Azure Arc, and you want to run an app service on that Kubernetes cluster that is running on premises instead of running an app service in the cloud, in the Azure cloud. So those are the two sides that are here. Again, we're focusing on this first side. So when we want to onboard machines to Azure Arc, we can use this Add Resources button. And that's going to first ask us, well, what are you trying to onboard? Which resources are you trying to onboard? So I can onboard machines, and think of machines as operating systems, right? So they could be bare metal, they could be virtual machines, doesn't really matter. As long as it's not an Azure virtual machine, right? Azure virtual machines don't have to be onboarded to Azure Arc. They're already being managed with Azure, okay? I can also onboard a Kubernetes cluster. Now, that looks a little bit different than onboarding a VM. That would be done with some Kubernetes specific capabilities. What I can also do is I can bring online an entire host environment. So if you're using virtualization on premises, and by the way, raise your hand if you're not using virtualization on premises. It's 2024, so I suspect everybody does that, even though in some cases, I'm sure people still have bare metal servers around as well for some purposes. But in most cases, I suspect everybody's running virtualization everywhere these days. So maybe you're using VMware vSphere, maybe you're using System Center Virtual Machine Manager, or maybe you're using Azure Stack HCI. You have a ton of virtual machines, right, that are running on these host environments. Well, instead of onboarding every single virtual machine individually, right, we can go ahead and just at scale, right, discover and manage these resources that are living on our vSphere or that are being managed with our System Center Virtual Machine Manager, okay? Now, I can't really demonstrate that. I don't have a vSphere environment to play around with, or a System Center VMM, or an Azure Stack HCI. I'm sure that would make for an interesting demo, but again, I can't demonstrate that. So I'm going to assume that we're going to onboard the virtual machines or maybe physical machines that we have individually. So I'm going to click on this Add Create button, and I'm going to click Add a Machine. Now I have three more options that I'm presented with: adding a single server, adding multiple servers, or adding servers from update management. Now, I don't know how many of you could possibly be using Azure Automation Update Management. That service, if you happen to be using that service is being retired at the end of August this year, so at the end of August of 2024. And so I'm not even going to go over that anymore, right? It's just not going to be relevant for much longer. So even if you had Azure Automation Update Management, you could theoretically use that to onboard your Azure Arc machines, but it's not going to be around for much longer. So instead, we're going to focus on the first two options. The first option being adding a single server, the second option being adding multiple servers. Now, the difference between those two options is really very minimal, and it essentially exists out of this. When you use the add a single server option, you're going to get a script. It's going to be a PowerShell script if you want to onboard a Windows machine. It's going to be a bash script if you're going to onboard a Linux machine. And it's going to require you to interactively authenticate. So it's going to require you to use your Azure or Entra ID credential, maybe with MFA, however you have that configured, during the onboarding process, to authenticate to Azure and say, hey, I want to allow this server to connect to my environment. When you use the add multiple servers option, you're going to get a script that is probably 90% the same, but what it's going to do, instead of asking for your credential interactively, it's going to use a service principal, an application registration in your Entra ID with a client secret, so that you can use that more at scale, right? And so that's really where we call this difference: add a single server, add multiple servers. You can absolutely onboard as many servers as you like using this first option. It's just going to get a bit tedious because you're going to have to authenticate on every single server, or you could just onboard a single server using this multiple servers method, and that's perfectly fine as well. There isn't really a difference in the end result. is just how are you going to authenticate. And so this is clarified here, right? You can see the single server script will prompt you for your Azure login, right? And the multiple server script handles authentication through service principal, so it's much easier to automate and to apply at scale. Okay, so because I think most people will eventually use the add multiple servers, that's the route that I'm going to demonstrate. So I'm going to click Generate Script. And so I'm going to be faced with a few questions. First of all, like anything else that exists in Azure, I'm going to have to select a subscription, and I'm going to have to select a resource group. So which subscription and which resource group that you should use for a given server is going to depend on your resource organization strategy. So some customers choose to put all of their Arc servers in a single dedicated subscription. Then they create some resource groups to kind of differentiate between different types of servers. That's an okay strategy. Personally, I think it might make more sense to think application-centric and start thinking about, just like you would create multiple subscriptions in Azure when you're creating multiple workloads in Azure, right? Maybe you have a workload for your ERP system, maybe you have one for your website, etc., different subscriptions. I would recommend that you think about your Azure Arc enabled machines kind of in the same way, right? So if you have 100 VMs, they're probably doing different things on premises. So, that means that maybe you should consider not putting all 100 of those VMs in a single resource group. Maybe you should be splitting them across different resource groups and even across different subscriptions. Now, that's a whole discussion about governance that, is kind of out of the scope of this conversation. But, consider that, right, when you start onboarding your Arc machines. Think about your resource organization. Now, what's going to happen next is, again, like most other things that exist in Azure, I'm going to have to select a region in Azure to create this resource. I'm going to choose East US. Now, to be clear, nobody from Microsoft is going to show up at your doorstep and pack up your server and ship it to the East US data center. That's not what we're talking about. But the metadata, right, that is going to be used, that is going to be stored to represent that server that you have running on premises, to represent that in Azure, that's got to be stored somewhere. So that's what the significance of that region is, right? You'll be storing the data from that server in that region. And by the way, it's okay to laugh. That was a joke. The whole thing about Microsoft sending someone to pick up your server from on premises, that was a joke. Okay, and then you're also going to select the operating system. So you're going to select between Windows or Linux. And, not that Azure Arc distinguishes much between Windows or Linux, but like I said, the onboarding script that's going to get created is going to be different. For a Windows system, you're going to get a PowerShell script. For a Linux system, you're going to get a Bash script. See, question from Chris in the chat. For regions, what about disaster recovery? My region goes down. How does it fail over, or can it? Yeah, that's a good question. So if an entire Azure region were to go down, right, during that outage, that would essentially mean that you wouldn't be able to use Azure to manage, well, I guess it depends on which services are available and, unavailable in a region. But let's assume there's a complete regional failure, which is exceedingly unlikely, of course. But let's assume that that's the case. For the time of that outage in that region, that would mean that Azure Arc would not be able to use, or would not be able to be used to manage your resources on premises. There isn't really the concept of a failover. It's not really running a compute service, right? It's not really running an operating system in the cloud for you like a platform service would or like a virtual machine would. Okay. All right. Now, remember the 3 connectivity methods that I outlined earlier on the slide? Well, here they are. If I'm choosing public endpoint, if I'm choosing proxy server, if I'm choosing private endpoint, the script is going to look ever so slightly different, not in a significant way. I'm going to choose public endpoint. Now, I'm choosing to add a multiple server option. So it's asking me, hey, what service principal am I going to use, right, to authenticate and to say that, yes, it's okay for those servers to join my Azure Arc environment. Now, I have already created a service principal like that, so I can just select it from the drop-down list. Now, if this is your first time going here, well, then you're going to have to probably create a new service principal. So you can create a new service principal directly from within the portal here. You can give that service principal a name. And then we're going to say at which scope do you want that principal to have permissions to join stuff to your Azure. So we can select a subscription, we can select a resource group. Does that mean that you need a different principal for each subscription? No, it doesn't. You can, once that principal is created, you can assign the same principal that we're creating here. You can assign that permissions at a management group level, for example, give it those same roles that I'm about to show you there as well. It's just that this user interface, right, is working off the assumption that we only want to delegate permissions to this principal to onboard Arc machines in a single resource group or in a single subscription. By the way, if you decided it was best to create a service principal for different subscriptions, different service principals for different subscriptions, that could be a perfectly valid strategy as well, okay? I'm just saying it's not necessary to do that. So if I wanted my service principal to be able to enroll or onboard Azure Arc machines on any resource group in my subscription, I'll change it to subscription, and then I'll choose a subscription. In my case, I'll use my core subscription. Then I also can go ahead and add a description here, right? So I can not.NET Azure Users Group. So there we go. So that's my description of my service principals, client secret. Okay, so, and then I can say, hey, how long is this client secret going to be valid for? 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, or something custom. Now you might look at this and you might say, 1 day, well, that's awfully short, right? If I use the service principal, I onboard this Arc machine. I'm not going to onboard an Arc machine to use for just 1 day, right? That doesn't make any sense. We're going to be doing this probably for years, right? For the rest of the lifetime of that operating system, we want it to be managed through Azure Arc once we onboard it. Now, this client secret is not used by this VM to continuously authenticate itself to Azure. This client secret, or this service principal, I should say, the service principal is used only during the onboarding process, right? So if I'm 1 day onboarding 50 machines, well, then I just need to have a service principal's client secret that's valid for that 1 day that I'm onboarding machines. After that, once the machine is onboarded, it'll authenticate itself to the Azure Arc service using a certificate. And that certificate is going to expire at some point, but it'll automatically renew as long as the machine is on and connected, within a certain period of time. Okay, so it makes perfect sense potentially to have that client secret expire after 1 day. Then finally, here in the role assignment, you can select 1 or more roles that you want that service principal to be given at the subscription or the resource group level that you've selected. In order to do what we're going to be doing here, we just need the Azure Connected Machine onboarding role. Okay, you can read about the meaning of the other roles in our documentation. Okay, I want to stay on track here and just talk about what it takes to onboard machines. So that is the role that you need for that. Okay, and you would go ahead and click create, and then you can use that service principal here from the drop-down list. Now I already have one, so I'm not going to bother actually creating it and just use the one that I already have. And then the next step, I can apply tags. Now, if you're familiar with working with Azure, then tags are probably nothing new to you. Tags are metadata, right? That you are, that you can use to organize your resources, maybe to enable governance around cost management, around disaster recovery management. And those things apply here as well, right? So if I have, a tag, I like to apply a tag called date created, and, I'll put my date in there that a resource was created. Let's see, the 15th is today. So I can do that, and that is available to me as well. Now, there are some other tags here at the top of the screen that say physical location tags. What does that mean? Well, just to be clear, these are just your normal kind of Azure tags, okay? The fact that this tag name is data center and city, state or district, country or region is really just a convention. Okay, this is just a convention that help you organize your Azure Arc resources, with the different data centers that you have. Now, I don't really operate a real data center. My data center is my laptop, so I use the name of my laptop for my data center, and then I live in Mount Juliet in Tennessee in the United States. So for me, this is what those physical location tags would look like. If you don't want to use those, that's probably fine. Azure Arc doesn't really need them to be there. Again, it's simply for your convenience that it suggests putting these tags in, and of course consistently applying them to every Azure Arc resource that you onboard. Okay, we're at the last step here of onboarding, so we're going to go ahead and click next. Because I chose to add multiple servers, right, at scale, I get a few different options for getting a script. So I can get a script that is kind of prepared to work with Configuration Manager, one that is prepared to work with Group Policy, or one that I can put in an Ansible module, right? Now, I'm just going to look at the basic script here. Again, the actual code doesn't change that much. It's just some of the plumbing around it that changes. And so you can see here that the first thing that happens in the PowerShell script is I get my app registration ID. And then here is where I have to put my application secret, right? The client secret that I would have generated, that thing that may have only been valid for like 1 day. I'll have to put that in here myself. Then there is some environment variables that are being set. And again, you'll recognize some of these things, right? I chose a subscription ID. I chose a resource group. I'm in a tenant. I chose a location and so on. So all of that is going to be set here as environment variables. So they are going to be used later on when we actually do the onboarding. Then the next significant thing that's going to happen is that we're actually going to download something from aka.ms/azcmagent-windows. Okay, azcmagent is Azure Connected Machine Agent. Okay, and this is of course a Windows one. Okay, this is a PowerShell file. Like you can see here, we're saving it temporarily as install Windows azcmagent.ps1. And then what we're doing is we're actually going to execute that PowerShell script that we've just downloaded. Now, if you want to take a look at that PowerShell script before you execute it, that's no problem, right? You can just go to this URL and it'll download the script for you. You can examine what it's going to do before you run it. But what it essentially does is it goes and it downloads the installation package of the connected machine agent, and it goes and executes it in a silent fashion, with some silent install options provisioned. Okay, so that's what that is going to do. And then the final thing of significance that happens in the script, the agent has been installed, right? And the agent is an executable called azcmagent.exe. So once again, Azure Connected Machine Agent.exe. It has a connect command in it, and then we specify, some of the things that it needs in order to perform that connection, like the service principal to use, the secret to use, which resource group to put it in, etc., etc. And you can even see the tags here. Excuse me. You can even see the tags here that are being used that I specified on the previous screen. So all that's left for me to do is hit download, copy that script, I don't know, maybe to a file share or some other method, and actually run it. Okay. Now, I'm not actually going to do this. I've already onboarded all the machines that I have to Azure Arc, so I don't have any more to onboard, but hopefully this walkthrough is valuable for you so you can know what to expect as you go through this wizard if it were on your own. Now, Chris, I see your question in the chat. Let me see. Which do you see most often? Public endpoint? And yes, project requirements will vary, just asking for a ballpark. Yes, I do see public endpoints the most often, right? Definitely. Definitely public endpoints. And second is proxy servers, for those customers who have VMs, maybe some, maybe not all, right? But who have VMs that for security purposes are not allowed to reach the internet directly. I see public endpoint the most often. It's fairly rare to see private endpoints. And I'm not making a value judgment based on that, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't consider private endpoints. I'm just saying that's what I see for most customers. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this wizard. When you've executed that script, what are you going to get? Well, now I can go to my Azure Arc resources menu, to the Azure Arc machines, and my onboarded servers are going to show up here. So I've onboarded 4 of them, right? You can see them all here. They're listed by their computer name. So this is their computer name in the operating system. That's how they're listed here. And you can see that of the 4 machines that I've onboarded, 3 of them are connected. And one of them shows as expired. Okay, what does that mean? Well, this machine has been offline for so long that the certificate that it was issued to authenticate to the Azure Arc service has expired. What do I need to do about this? Well, I pretty much just have to go onto that machine and reconnect that agent with either a service principal or with my interactive credential so it can get a new certificate. Okay. Now, of course, in some cases, I think the certificate, I'm not 100% sure about this, but if I remember correctly, this happened after about 90 days of not connecting this virtual machine. So that certificate is about valid for 90 days. And, I think if you're going to onboard a server and then it's not turned on or not connected, at least for 90 days, it's probably a good sign that the server's retired, right? So maybe I just need to delete that server. I'm keeping this in here, of course, simply for demo purposes. But if this happens to you on a server that does in fact still need to be connected, once you bring it back online, again, you can just follow the steps to reconnect the agent, again, using the service principal and client secret or using your interactive credential. And then it'll reconnect and start communicating again. Let's see. I see Mamu's question. What are the challenges when using private endpoints? So it's not necessarily a question of a challenge. There's some DNS work involved. There's some prep work involved on the Azure side to set up the private link service for Azure Arc and to create that private endpoint. But once you get past that, it's just like a one-time thing, an initial setup thing. But I think most customers don't really see the value of running the data, right, that agent sends and the instructions that it receives. Don't see the value running it over site-to-site VPN or running it over an express route. Now, to be clear, there are customers who are doing that, who are in high security environments or something like that, or who just for preferential reasons say we want to use private endpoints. Okay, but since everything connects to HTTPS 443, most customers are satisfied with the protection that provides and just use that option. Okay, I see Naz's question. Can I onboard a legacy OS? Well, that's a great question, Naz. And as a matter of fact, maybe this answers your question right here. I actually have a Windows Server 2012 R2 machine connected, and so hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if we still support Windows Server 2008 R2. I'd have to look that up in the docs. It's possible that we still do, but honestly, I'm not sure. But so at least as far back as Windows Server 2012 R2. By the way, the reason for that, of course, is so that we can use extended security updates, or so that we can issue extended security updates licenses through Azure Arc, right? We'd have to onboard a machine in order to get Azure Arc to give out that license for the extended security updates. All right, what else do we see here? So I see the resource groups and the subscriptions. So I've done this very simply for my demo environment. All of my machines happen to be in the same resource group and happen to be in the same subscription. If you're going to be doing this for production purposes, like I mentioned earlier, I strongly encourage you to consider organizing your Azure Arc resources by workload. So definitely multiple resource groups in many cases, probably even, for real good governance capabilities and aligned with our cloud adoption framework for Azure, probably even distributing them across different subscriptions. And when I say distributing, I'm not talking about like load balancing, but I'm talking about organizing them by workload in subscriptions. Couple other things that I can see here, right? So in my case here, I have the and excuse the coughing. In my case here, I have on all of my servers enabled the Defender for Cloud extension. I have also enabled the monitoring extension. I will show you how I did this. You could think maybe that with 4 servers, maybe I've gone on each individual server and enabled that extension. You might think, well, if I have a couple of hundred servers, because I've worked with clients who have onboarded 6,000 of them, okay? So, that's not really feasible. We don't want to go log in to 6,000 individual servers or via Azure, add 6,000 or I guess 12,000, right? 2 per server extensions. We don't want to do that. So we're actually going to use Azure Policy to deploy extensions at scale. And that's exactly how I've done this. And I can show you, if you're interested in that, how that's configured. And then here, for good measure, I've gone ahead and in my list view also added my data center tag, right? And so I can see on which of my laptops this virtual machine is actually running. Okay, so and there are more. I can manage the view and I can edit the columns. I can add my other tags if I like as well. So if I wanted to add my, let's say, state tag. Let me see, state or district tag, I can do that too. Okay, not much value for me, of course, because they're all running in Tennessee. All right, there we go. So back to the overview page here. All right, so I realize it's already 7 o'clock, by the way, and I've already covered a lot of ground. I would love to hear from you in the chat. I know you're asking questions in the chat, which I absolutely love. It's absolutely great to do that. I kind of want your opinion, input on what else you want to see me do with these Azure Arc machines. In the meantime, let me show you what happens, for example, when I click on this Azure Arc machine. So as you might expect, I'm taken to a detail page that gives me some of the essentials about this machine. So I can see, again, the computer name from the operating system. I can see the FQDN. None of my machines are actually onboarded to or joined to an Active Directory domain. So my FQDN, my computer name aren't any different. But if I had connected them to an Active Directory domain, my FQDN would say something like, AC Arc or AC Arc SQL 12 domain.alterman.com or something like that, right? I can see again the operating system that was already shown earlier. I can see the very specific operating system version. I can see the cloud provider that it's running in. It says not available because it's running on my own machine. But if this was running in GCP or in AWS, it would tell me that. Then the manufacturer of the machine, now it's a VM in Hyper-V, so the manufacturer is Microsoft Corporation Virtual Machine. But if this was a, let's say, a machine running on vSphere, right, it would tell me vSphere probably virtual machine. Or if I was running on bare metal, then it might tell me this is an HP server or something along those lines. Okay. Then I can also see some of the capabilities that we have here. So we can manage extended security updates. We can do patch management. We can collect logs. We can collect change tracking and inventory. We can, of course, configure security. This one happens to be a SQL server, so I can view the SQL Server configuration and do so much more with SQL Server. Again, lots of things I could show you if you're interested. So that's kind of the overview. I want to show you a couple of the really cool stuff that is possible with Azure Arc, and I'm going to do that in a minute. I'm first going to look at Chris's question. I've read of Arc, I like what I see, but I've not the opportunity to work on a project. Looks straightforward. But in your experience, are there any gotchas or customer misunderstandings with how it works? Wow, that's a really great question, Chris. Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure if I can think of anything, but I'll certainly keep your question in mind. And if there's something that comes up, I'll answer it down the road here in the presentation. All right. Another question. What happens if an Arc client loses connectivity to Azure or the proxy? Does it cache for X amount of time? Yeah, eventually, like what happened here, right? That machine is going, that machine certificate is going to expire. If that machine then comes back online, I'm going to have to actually reconnect it manually. But other than that, I don't know when this machine was last communicating with Arc. It's been a long time that it has been, but all the information that was previously available from this machine is going to remain available. Okay, I think there is probably a way that I can see here when we last heard from this machine. I'm trying to think. I think I saw that somewhere in some. Yeah, maybe it was in the logs. I can't remember exactly where that was, but I do believe there was somewhere some date that was shown, date and time of when the machine last communicated. Let me see, maybe it's under security. No, I don't see it right now. It may have been something that I queried in the logs, but anyway. So this machine isn't necessarily just going to disappear, right? But yeah, there won't be any new information, right? So like I have inventory enabled on this machine. Well, that inventory is going to be out of date, of course, right? If I don't have a connection. All right. Thanks for all the questions, Chris. I really do appreciate the interactivity. So if anyone else has questions, please go ahead and post them in the chat. Okay, so I wanted to show you a couple of cool things. So one of the coolest things, in my opinion, that you can do with Azure Arc is enabling the Windows Admin Center. Well, obviously that's for Windows VMs. That doesn't work for Linux VMs. But when you enable the Windows Admin Center, you can manage the Windows operating system and all the usual things that you would manage via the Windows Admin Center from within the Azure portal. And I want to be clear about this. This is without having line of sight to that virtual machine. Okay, now I know that's easy for me to say because I'm running on my laptop. My virtual machines are running on the same laptop. So clearly I have line of sight to my VMs, but Azure Arc isn't using that, right? So on my Windows Server 2022 machine, I have enabled the Windows Admin Center. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the cool things that I can do directly from within the Azure portal, right? Without needing a VPN connection, without needing some kind of special configuration. I have just deployed the connected machine agent on that machine. Then the first time I came here, I had to say, I don't know, deploy or something like that. Once I've done this is an extension, by the way. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But once that extension is there, I can just hit connect. And it's going to load the Windows admin interface for me. It's actually communicating with that dark machine. Okay, not directly, right? My system might not have line of sight, so it's actually reaching out to Azure Arc. The portal is reaching out to Azure Arc. Azure Arc is sending some commands to that Arc VM, and that information is flowing back up and so on. So if you're using Windows Admin Center, then this should look pretty familiar, right? This is what the Azure Admin Center is. So I get some overview of the basics of my machine. I can scroll down a little bit and I can get some statistics about utilization of memory and CPU and Ethernet and disk. This is all relatively basic. But for example, I can look at the hardware devices that are connected to my machine. And this is of course a virtual machine, so there isn't a whole lot to look at. But if I had a piece of hardware that required a driver update, I can hit update driver from right here using Windows Update. I don't need any other kind of connection to my VM. If I wanted to manage some file shares, well, I can do that from here. I don't know if this machine has any file shares, but we'll see. Oh yeah, so of course, well, there's the default file shares, the admin shares, but I can create a new file share. I can say, okay, let me browse my PC, okay, on the C drive, because I don't have any other drives. I can even make a new folder from here, and I'm going to say file share 1. I'm going to let that new folder create. That folder's there. There's file share 1. I'm going to create this folder. I'm going to call it file share 1. I can modify my share permissions if I want to and create this file share. Okay, so I have just created a file server off of this machine without having to log into it, without needing to use PowerShell, remoting, or anything like that. I can just go ahead and create this file share. Okay. I can look at the installed applications that are on that machine. Again, this is just a little demo machine. There isn't much there. But you can see, for example, that the Azure Connected Machine Agent is one of those applications that's installed there. Right? Now, I'm going to answer Chris's question, and then I'm going to show you what is by far, to me, the most powerful capability of this entire Windows Admin Center. Now, let's see here. It would be cool if Cockpit was on the Arc roadmap for Linux machines. You could do anything via the CLI, via Arc if I was on it. Yeah, good question. I'm not familiar with Cockpit, so forgive me. I'm assuming based on the way you're asking the question that some kind of a Linux management tool similar to Windows Admin Center, but I haven't heard of it myself. I have a lot to learn about Linux, clearly. But yes, with a Linux machine, you can connect to the CLI, so actually over SSH, but completely, again, mediated via via Azure Arc, right? Again, so without line of sight to that VM, I can SSH into it and use the command line to do everything with a Linux machine. Okay, and thank you for clarifying that Cockpit is a Red Hat tool. I had not heard of it. Most of my Linux experience, which is again limited, is with Ubuntu. So I guess Ubuntu may have some similar service. I think I saw it the other day, but I have not used that either. Anyway, like I said, by far one of the coolest things that I can do with this admin center is I can open up a remote desktop to this server. Okay, if I can remember my username and my password to this, I'm going to do my best here. Don't laugh if I don't remember. I have it saved somewhere. Okay, and I'm going to say, yeah, automatically connect with the certificate, etc. It's just a security question. Okay, so right now I am connected to this remote desktop, to the GUI, using my web browser without, and again, I can't stress this enough, right? Without having line of sight to this VM, right? So this is not a connection to like whatever IP address this virtual machine happens to have in my Hyper-V environment. This is going via Azure Arc, via the Azure Arc agent connection to that machine and bringing it back into the browser, right? So really, really cool feature. In other words, now I can do anything I like on this system, right? If there's something I need to do that for some reason isn't available from the other Windows Admin Center tools, I can do it from here for sure. So really, really, really cool. Now, after you see this, right, you might legitimately ask, yeah, but wait a minute. Who can do this? Because when I first clicked connect on the Windows Admin Center, it didn't ask me for a username or a password or anything like that. Based on what authority, right, was I able to connect to this machine and create a file share? For the remote desktop, it did ask me for a username and a password. So, okay, so that's a little bit different. Well, how does that work? Well, that works using role-based access control in Azure. Okay, so when I click View My Access, what you're going to see, one of the roles that I have given myself. Well, actually, I didn't have to give myself any roles because I'm an owner, but there are actually specific roles that are needed. If you're not owner to do this, so I'll talk about that in a little bit. And one of them here is Windows Admin Center Administrator Login, right? So this is the one that makes Windows Admin Center work. The owner role is what makes everything else work outside of Windows Admin Center, such as installing extensions and such. But if you don't want to go like the owner role or the contributor role, right, there are Arc-specific roles that you can assign to users that don't necessarily give that many permissions, right? But so for me to be able to click on Windows Admin Center and click Connect, I must have this Windows Admin Center Administrator Login role. Okay, that's what I must have. All right, so it's about, let's see, 7:15. I've been talking for about an hour. I would love to talk about so many more things. I can talk about Azure policy. I can talk about SQL Server capabilities and things like that. I don't want to keep anybody longer here than what needs to be. And I'll answer questions for as long as I can, right? For as long as you want to stay on and ask questions. But before I do that, I want to kind of wrap it up with a question maybe that you might have on your mind about cost. Okay, what does it cost to do what I have just done? And there's some misunderstanding there. So maybe, Chris, this goes back to to the question that you asked me earlier about kind of common misunderstandings or gotchas, and that relates to the cost. So Azure Arc as this foundational capability, that by itself does not incur a charge. So I can onboard as many VMs as I want to Azure Arc and look at their look at them in terms of, hey, what operating system version do you have and things like that. There's no cost for that. Now, when I start using some of those services like Defender for Cloud to configure the security or to review the security posture of that machine, or when I start collecting syslog data with the Azure Monitor agent, or when I enable ESUs, when I enable extended security updates, those things are not free, right? So when you start actually using most probably, of the Azure services to manage that, right, the charges that you're going to see are those for those Azure services. Okay, so Azure Arc by itself doesn't necessarily incur a charge, but then there might be charges for data ingestion into log analytics. There would be a charge for the extended security update licensing if you have legacy operating systems. The next thing that I could demo would be, for example, Azure Update Manager. If you don't have Defender for Cloud Plan 2, then Azure Update Manager would incur a charge per month to manage the patching for that server. Okay, so there's also something when you go at the pricing page for Azure Arc, you're going to see that using Azure policies could incur a $6 per server per month charge. Well, that's true, right? That's on the pricing page. That's absolutely true. But it's not just using any kind of Azure policy that's going to incur this charge. There's actually a ton of Azure policy management that you can do on an Azure Arc VM that are free. Okay, so hopefully this chart here can help you navigate through this. Now, the one thing I will say, be very careful. You see no, 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 and then it switches to yes, and then back no. So don't misinterpret the answer here. Okay, this one is the yes, goes on, is the no that goes to the free tier. Okay, but if the policy is like a regulatory compliance policy, excuse me, like I mentioned before for Defender for Cloud, okay, there's no extra charge associated for that. Now, the machine has to be onboarded to Defender for Cloud, so you're paying for Defender for Cloud, but you're not paying that $6 per month for using Azure policies. If you're using Azure Automation on that machine, if you have the runbook worker, for example, if that answer to that is yes, then Azure policies also aren't being charged. Is the Azure policy that's being applied to the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark? If the answer to that is yes, that's also available for free. If the Azure policy category is guest configuration, okay, I'll talk a little bit in a minute what that is, because maybe not everybody knows what that means. But if it's not, okay, and again, this is a no answer here, not the yes one, okay. If it's not guest configuration, then it's also free, right? So now, what is guest configuration? So guest configuration is a set of Azure policy definitions that work at the operating system level. Okay, so they don't work at the Azure resource level. They work at the level of the operating system. So, for example, the Windows Server Security Benchmark, that is an example of guest configuration. Okay, that's a guest configuration policy. Okay, so if it is a guest configuration policy, still doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to incur that charge, because if the VM is then hosted on an Azure Stack HCI environment with the Arc Agent 1.13 or higher, which, by the way, 1.13 by now is, I don't know how ancient, but that's an old version. So today you're almost certainly using a much newer version than 1.13, then that's still free, right? So in other words, when do you pay the $6 per month per server when you're using Azure policies? It's if they're guest config policies and you're not, it's not being deployed with Defender for Cloud, or it's not being deployed with Azure Automation, and it's not part of the Azure, of the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. Okay, that's the other way to read the chart. If you read it backwards, there are very few conditions under which you incur those charges. But again, it's important to be aware of this, right? You don't want to accidentally start incurring those charges. So if you want to take a screenshot of this chart, go ahead and do this. This is certainly available in documentation as well, but this flow chart is probably the best version of the pricing sheet that I have personally seen. Okay. So let's see. Yeah. Chris has a question in the chat. Can the Windows Admin Center be locked down to only be accessed by Arc? Wow, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, Chris. Yeah, I'm not sure. So that would be very interesting, and I wish I knew of there was a doc or somewhere that I could quickly pull up to find the answer, but I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it probably is documented somewhere. I just don't know exactly where to go and find it. But that's an interesting question. So I guess what Chris is really asking is, I've shown you how you can lock down access to the Windows Admin Center from within the Azure portal, and I've said, hey, you have to have that particular role assignment for your user account, right, in order to be able to click this connect button and it actually work. Now, the Windows Admin Center, that's a service that's running on this Windows machine, right? And so that could potentially be accessed from the local environment as well. And so Chris is probably asking, hey, can I make sure it can only be accessed this way using the Azure portal and not at all from the local environment? And I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think you're the first person to ever ask me that, so you definitely get a gold star for coming up with a great question, Chris. All right, let's see. Any other questions that I can answer for anyone here? If not, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. Let's see. I have, like I said, a whole bunch of more slides here. Since we did talk about pricing, I'll go ahead and pull up some of the pricing here, right? So I've talked about if you start using other services like ingesting logs or using Azure Update Manager, there's a couple other ones here, right? There are charges for those services, but not for Azure Arc by itself. All right. Thank you, Mamo. I appreciate the feedback. And again, I'll stay on until all of you get bored and drop off. Bill, in the meantime, maybe I'll turn it back over to you to maybe say a few closing words.
Okay, well, thank you. Very interesting presentation. I'm going to leave it open for people to do questions for a little while longer. So use the chat, post your questions,
I see a question from Nas. Can we get the presentation slides? Yes, I can distribute those. I'm trying to think of what the best way to do that might be, and maybe what I'll do is post them in a message in a post on LinkedIn. So if you like, I'll post my LinkedIn profile link here in the meeting chat. Oh, hang on. Forgot to use HTTPS instead of HTTP. So let me fix that.
Okay.
So that should be a short link to my LinkedIn profile. Yeah, that interesting. That still has a connection error. What did okay. So I created the short link many moons ago. And I don't even remember which service offered that that short link service, but okay, I'll have to give you my full link to my LinkedIn profile apparently, because the short link seems to have stopped working after like 10 years or so. That's a major bummer, but anyway. Okay, here's my full profile link. So yeah, follow me there, and sometime later this evening I'll package up the slides that I used as a PDF file and I'm attaching to a post. Okay, so let's do it that way. All right, thank you for asking, Nas. Any other questions? Any other follow-ups?
I think that's great. One thing I don't want to forget before I do forget is we don't have a topic scheduled for next month. Let us know what topic you'd like to hear. We're going to be scheduling a lot of topics in the future, but so far we've gone month to month. So if you've got a topic that you'd like to hear about, let us know and we'll find a speaker for it. We're good at that. Okay. Okay, Sven, back to you.
Mamo has a question. Anything platform as a service? I love platform as a service. Platform as a service is the best thing about Azure, right? Because anybody can run a VM, but platform services is where the real power is. So if you have any specific suggestions, Mamo, I don't know if you're talking app service or AKS or update manager, or I don't know what it could be.
Containers.
Let us know. Okay,
Yeah.
functions, Azure SQL database, whatever. But anything past, sure, that sounds like a good suggestion. All right. So let me hear any other questions from the audience about Azure Arc.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we can wrap it up. It's now 7:30. We've been going since 6 o'clock. So
Yep.
one
It's
last chance to
been a
get your
lengthy
questions.
session. So I want to maybe comment very quickly on a comment that Ed left in the chat. Ed saying WAC, Windows Admin Center, is a management tool. So it accesses Arc-enabled servers as well as on-prem servers. You can run on any Windows computer. Yeah, that's absolutely correct, of course. That's true for Windows Admin Center. Now, the process, right, by which we're accessing or by which we're using the Windows Admin Center via the Azure portal, that is specific to Azure Arc, right? So you can have an existing server on which you've deployed the Windows Admin Center, like as a standalone tool or even as a centralized management tool. That doesn't necessarily mean that from the Azure portal you're going to be able to manage that server like I did here. Okay, so clarification there. So it's the same kind of Windows Admin Center, but it's deployed in a way that the connections are established via the Azure Arc agent and not just via some random port, on your server. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks so much, Bill, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see you again next month. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.